roast it. Tell them they will eat the bugs.
But my lord, the people, they want their meat.
Do it!
Grasshoppers were historically a principal food source among many American Indians, especially in the arid regions such as the Great Basin. The list of tribes who ate them is too long to recite, but there are a number of things I learned from studying their use of grasshoppers for food. Many natives considered grasshoppers to be somewhat of a delicacy and ate them whenever available. I've got a bug net, but how were they gathered historically? Well, to obtain subsistence quantities, there was a common basic method. So a pit was dug in a field where grasshoppers were abundant. Then a circle of natives was formed around the pit, each with a bush in hand, with which they beat the ground in vegetation while marching forward, gradually tightening the circle to drive the grasshoppers towards the pit until they eventually all fell in and were caught. Sometimes fire was incorporated into this method, either by burning the surrounding grass to drive the grasshoppers, or burning in the central area or pit once the grasshoppers were corralled there. The collection pits were dug with the openings more narrow than the base, or simply very large and deep to prevent the grasshoppers from jumping out. Another common basic method was to simply pick up the grasshoppers from the ground or vegetation early in the morning before they were warm enough to be active. It doesn't really quite get cold enough in the summer in Texas to do that. But Comanche boys shot grasshoppers for sport and food, using arrows tipped with a cross piece. And the nymphs, or the wingless immature grasshoppers, were eaten as were the adults. So they were eaten in various forms: whole, dried, mashed, or roasted. No accounts record grasshoppers being eaten totally raw, probably because they can transmit parasites. They were commonly roasted in hot coals and ashes and then ground into a meal, which could be made into a gruel or eaten by itself, or mixed with acorn meal or pignole to make a mush that was boiled in baskets with hot rocks to eat, or was baked into bread for long-term storage. Now, collected by burning grassland, such as by the Maidu, their wings were singed off, and so they only need slight roasting, if any, before being eaten immediately or stored for winter use. So in this case, they were sometimes threaded on a string or a sharpened stick and slightly roasted, then eaten. They were also shaken with coals and basketry trays, or boiled or baked in earth ovens for large quantities. When I have just a handful, I like to skewer them alive with a mesquite thorn with a twig attached and then roast them over coals. Once cooked, I pull off the head, which also pulls off its crop or stomach, and pull off the wings and the legs, except for the big ones, and then eat them whole. They taste similar to shrimp, which is pretty good, absolutely no unpleasant taste. They're a bit drier and crunchier than shrimp, though. I call them grass shrimp. And I kind of prefer the grass-fed bugs, the industrial, waste-fed shrimp. So you can improve their taste by allowing them to sit for 24 hours after gathering so they have a chance to purge their guts. But when I have a lot, I dump them alive into boiling water until they're cooked, which you can sometimes tell because they turn red like shrimp. It's actually the same chemical reaction since their exoskeleton is the same material, chitin. Then I dry them in the sun or oven or dehydrator, remove the wings and legs by lightly crushing and winnowing, then grind them into a meal. I mix this meal with dried wild fruits in the same habitat as these grasshoppers and can form little energy bars. So grasshoppers, crickets, and katydids, collectively called orthopterans, were historically really important food sources because they have a really high return on energy invested to gather them. So the bugs convert grass to protein and fat more efficiently than mammals, and it takes comparatively little effort to gather large amounts of these macronutrients, protein and fat, using orthopteran flesh. And it takes some simple but pretty sophisticated, intelligent techniques devised by natives. The techniques take advantage of natural escape behaviors and use it against them. And there's some really clever applications involving shaped trenches and hilly terrain, but it's a bit too long to describe. Okay, I'll tell you. So, the crickets were all dried and ground whole on the same mill used for pine nuts or grass seeds, and it makes a fine flour that will keep a really long time if kept dry. And a bread or cake is made from them, and cricket flour is added to pine nut or grass seed meal to make a bread, making it sweeter. So yeah, the use of crickets among American Indians is extremely extensive, going from Texas to California, and especially in the Great Basin area, it's the most prominent use of them for food. But I'm sure all over North America, indigenous people were eating orthopterans pretty regularly, but definitely when you have less access to proteins and fats, they're going to be extremely good food source. So I wouldn't be afraid by that. You know, in a lot of cultures worldwide, grasshoppers are very commonly eaten. Western, especially American culture, is very unique in having this visceral abhorrence to terrestrial arthropods as a food source, but then we love things like lobsters and crickets. I'm sure you've all heard this stuff before, but give a grasshopper a try. You might be surprised. They taste good. There's no way around it. And I think the local ones here are especially good. You can find some really nice big ones. I find the biggest ones here are in the biggest grasses. So they like to feed on, sorghum halopense or Johnson grass, and also Ambrosia trifida, giant ragweed. I'm not sure they're eating that, but they definitely are found on those branches a lot. So one way I collect them is to go through a field where there's a bunch of tall grass. They also like the little blue stem grass, which, despite the name, is really big. But I go through a field, and if I see some, I'll start going more slowly and try to spot them on the branches or the stems of the grass or ragweed before they fly away, because once they fly away, it's hard to keep track of. But if you can spot them before they've flown away, you can use this is a sweep net and just hit the vegetation and they'll go with it. Another method is to just go through a field like that, just sweeping indiscriminately across the vegetation. A net like this is gonna wear on it eventually. You can get a canvas net instead of this fine mesh, like a butterfly net. That's better for sweep netting. And another way too is to actually wait till you see them fly off and then track one, make sure you don't get distracted by all the others flying away, and see where it lands and go up to that and catch it before it jumps off again. Their main evasion techniques are just going away from where there's a disturbance, so they see shadows or large figures moving. But they also have a technique where they go to the ground and sort of burrow down, get under some dry grass and try to hide. And in the latter case, often you can pursue them and pick them up by hand that way. And I have tried picking them up in colder temperatures in the early morning, and they definitely are easier to pick up that way. But it's kind of warm in central Texas, so they're still rather active at that time, and I find that I'd just rather not get up early and just go sweep them with this. It's a lot of fun.